Alright, today we're going to talk about how to find the equation of vertical asymptotes of a secant function. So first, we must figure out what horizontal transformations there are. Now, anything outside the parentheses, like the times 4 and this plus 1, are both going to become vertical transformations. So those will not affect our equations for the vertical asymptotes. What would affect them are the horizontal transformations which occur inside the parentheses. So for example, this times 3 right here is a horizontal transformation, just like this minus pi over 2 is also a horizontal transformation. So there's actually two horizontal transformations that matter to determine the equation of our vertical asymptotes. Now, what's tricky about this is that anything inside the parentheses or a horizontal change is actually the opposite of what you see. For example, this times 3 right here, actually doesn't mean times 3. You need to do the complete opposite of that, which is multiply by 1/3 or divide by 3. And this minus pi over 2, the subtracting pi over 2, you actually want to do the complete opposite, which is add pi over 2. Now, you must do these transformations to the reciprocal of secant function. So you must take a look at the cosine function. And you must look at the parent table of the cosine function. And the parent table of the cosine function is 0, starts at 0, then pi over 2, then pi, then 3 pi over 2, then 2 pi, and we have 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. Once again, the vertical transformations have no effect. The y value doesn't really matter. What we're focused on here is the x coordinates. So the only thing that affects it are these two things right here. So let's do them one at a time. We're going to do the first transformation, which is multiply the x coordinates by 1/3. So if we multiply it by 1/3, we are now going to end up with 0. If we multiply pi over 2 by 1/3, we now have pi over 6. If I multiply pi by 1/3, we have pi over 3. If I multiply 3 pi over 2 by 1/3, I end up with pi over 2. If I multiply 2 pi by 1/3, we end up with 2 pi over 3. And we have completed this first transformation horizontally. The next thing we gotta do is add pi over 2. So if we add pi over 2, we now end up with 0 plus pi over 2 is pi over 2. Pi over 6 plus pi over 2. We need a common denominator in order to keep going, which means I need to multiply this by 3 over 3 to end up with pi over 6 plus 3 pi over 6, hence 4 pi over 6, which reduces to 2 pi over 3, and that's why this here is 2 pi over 3 now. We will continue with the same steps. Pi over 3, we need to add pi over 2. I need a common denominator. This time, I need to multiply this by 3 over 3, and the left fraction by 2 over 2. And we will get 2 pi over 6 for the left fraction. Add 3 pi over 6, which gives us 5 pi over 6. So this is now 5 pi over 6. Next step is pi over 2 plus pi over 2. They already have a common denominator, therefore we end up with 2 pi over 2, which is pi. And for the last one, 2 pi over 3, we add pi over 2 once more. We need a common denominator, so we multiply this by 3 over 3. and this fraction by 2 over 2 to have a common denominator of 6. And this also be a common denominator of 6 here. And 7 pi over 6. Now we have completely transformed the table. As you can see, the x coordinates have changed. Now, this right here, the equilibriums, as you can see, there's the max right here. Let me change my color here. This is the max. This is the max. This is the highest number. This is the smallest number on the y column. And this right here would be called the equilibrium. Same thing here. Now, the vertical asymptotes occur at the equilibrium. So, vertical asymptote will occur at x equals. Now, the first vertical asymptote will occur right here. Now, these are already the old ones, so I don't care about that. I focus on 2 pi over 3 plus n times. Now, I need to figure out how to get from this vertical asymptote right here to the next one, which is right here. As you can see, once again, this don't matter. That's the equilibrium right there. So somehow 2 pi over 3 becomes pi. So how do you figure that out? So in order to figure that out, we're going to take the bigger number, which is pi. We're going to subtract 2 pi over 3. And we need a common denominator once again. So I multiply by 3 over 3 to end up with 3 pi over 3 minus 2 pi over 3. As you can see, we now have a common denominator. And if we subtract, we end up with pi over 3. Therefore, pi over 3 goes here. And we have written the equation for the vertical asymptote of a secant function. And that is it. Thank you for listening. Check out my other videos.